My name is Claire Hayes, and I am excited to talk with you today about keeping students challenged and Read Naturally Live. This topic is one of my favorites to talk about because it's really where you spend the majority of your time throughout the school year. We have so many different trainings and webinars and videos that focus on getting the program up and running, which of course is essential. But it's also a very brief amount of time. It takes a lot of work, but once you get it up and running, then you have the rest of the school year. And during that rest of the school year, what you're doing is monitoring student performance. After the students pass the first few stories, you do something that's called checking initial placement. You can see on my slide, it's this grayed out um, item that's listed. We do have a webinar on checking initial placement, and that is available, a recorded one's available on our website. So that is what happens when we monitor student performance very early on in the school year or very early on in them beginning to use it. So typically checking placement happens after about 3 stories. Um, and keeping students challenged is then the rest of the year. So this not only in the monitoring performance section, this particular part of it is the one that takes up the vast majority of the time. What we're doing during this keeping students challenged is we're taking a look at their data and seeing if there's progress. And if there's enough progress, do we need a change and what should that change be? Read Naturally Live has a feature that's called Data Mentor, and Data Mentor provides support and help for checking initial placement after the students pass the first 1, 2, and 3 stories. And then they provide support throughout the program, comparing where the students started to where they are now, and would provide a suggestion if one is needed. I'm going to talk about data that is from a Students at a Glance report. I will show you how to run that report. But before I do that, I want to show you what is in this Students at a Glance report. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on the data so it's more easily viewable for you. Here you can see that we have a student whose current grade is 3rd. So if you take a look in the left corner, Lee is the student's name. And this first section gives you the information about the student. The second section gives you information about what they're working in. So this student is in the sequence series, level 2.5. It tells you when she started working in this program, and it tells you the number of stories passed. So everything in this initial kind of first half of white section is just information about the student. The rest of the columns are dedicated to data that is collected through Read Naturally Live. So this is curriculum-based measurement data. It's not formal assessment data, but it's still valuable to us. And you can see each column contains 2 numbers. The numbers are different in this case, and it is important to know it's not a fraction. This isn't 41/48. What it's telling you is the first number in each column is the average of the first 3, the stories the student passed. The second number in each column is the average of the most recent 3 stories the student has passed. So we can see that the first story 1, 2, and 3, the average cold timing score for Lee was 41. Now, after 10, 11, 12, those 3 stories average 48. So we can see there's progress there. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for indicators for increasing the challenge. If the student meets 2 or more of these indicators, if their cold timing score improves, their hot timing score improves, their quiz gets better. If the difference between their hot timing score and their story goal is 10 or more words, that's an indication that more of a challenge is needed. So think about the hot timing score or the pass timing score, that final time that you listen to the student read a story. If that score is a double-digit difference away from the student's story goal, it's possible they need more of a challenge. They're able to reach that story goal by quite a bit, indicating that possibly they could handle more of a challenge. Another thing to look at is how many practices they're having to do, and do they decrease? Students need to remain on the practice step until they meet their story goal during practice. So if a student started out the school year having to practice 6, 7 times, and then after a few months, they're only having to practice 3 or 4 times to meet that story goal. You can see that they were able to meet the story goal with fewer practices. We want our students to be as challenged as possible. You all know your special education or Title I teachers or RTI teachers, teachers who work with students who are behind. And so time is of the essence. And we need our students to be as challenged as possible because we know that challenging a student at the right amount is what will maximize their achievement. You can't challenge them to the point of frustration because that you could lose them for that, right? But you need to challenge them to the point that they have to work hard. It feels really good to meet a goal that you had to work hard to meet. You also had to work harder in order to meet it. And that makes you grow more, makes you make more progress. The last thing to consider is not in your students at a glance report. Instead, that last thing to consider is the behavior of the student. That's something that you as a teacher will notice. If you have a student who loved the program a while ago and now they're not as into it, not as engaged, possibly they need more of a challenge. And that's another thing to consider. So here are all those indicators for a challenge in visual format. And the students at a glance report provide you with specific numbers, right? It provides you with a specific average. So 41 compared to 48, right? But you don't even have to look at that to get a sense of whether or not there's progress. I can take a look at these cold scores for this student and see, all right, they're about below 60 on the current cold timing or the beginning cold timing scores. And now the most recent cold timing scores gets them up around 70. So there's progress on that cold timing. I can see by just looking at this report. I can also see that the hot timing score has gotten better. The first 3 is at or below 90, and the most recent 3 is getting up towards 100. And I can see that just by looking at the report, not taking averages or specific numbers. The difference between the hot timing or the past timing and the story goal is significantly greater than it was at the beginning of this level. So I can see the students barely making it to the story goal after the first 3, and now they're significantly above it. In the quiz, you can see that this student at first struggled a little bit more with comprehension. They were doing okay, but in the first 3 stories, the student missed 4 questions in the first 3 stories. And in the most recent 3 stories, the student has only missed 1 question. So there's progress there. And then the practices started at 6 and went down to 4. So this is an indication that there's progress in every area. Oftentimes, it's not hard to decide whether or not the student needs a change. What is harder is to decide what to do. And that's what we're going to talk about today. One thing to keep in mind is that we recommend only raising one thing at a time. So if you think a student can handle a higher level, you're likely to leave the story goal the same. If you want the student to focus in on rates and accuracy and expression and really work on fluency, and you want to raise the goal, then you're likely to leave the level the same. Now, after 12 stories, you have a whole nother set of 12 stories. So you are somewhat more likely to raise the goal. But after 24, you have to raise the level because there are only 24 stories in each level. But there is nothing magical about 12 or 24 stories. We just have them in 2 groups of 12. And so it's a natural reminder to teachers to take a look at that. But the truth is many students are ready for a change after 7 stories or 11 or 13 or 16, whatever. So you don't have to wait until those natural breaks. You can make the change whenever you think the student is ready. And something we always need to keep in mind when we're deciding whether or not we need to make a change and what that change should be is what the student's long-term fluency benchmark goal is. Okay, so when we consider that, we need to make sure that we all have the same definition of what long-term fluency benchmark goal is. So in order to talk about it in any meaningful way, we need to agree on the definition. And the long-term fluency benchmark goal for your students is that you want each student to be able to read unpracticed grade level material at, near, or above the 50th percentile on national norms. Okay, so unpracticed grade level. That means you want your 4th grader to read a 4th grade level passage. The very first time your 4th grader reads a 4th grade passage, they're able to do that around the 50th percentile. Okay, so it's grade level It's unpracticed, and you want them to be around that 50th percentile. In the fall, you probably used an assessment tool to identify which kids should utilize this intervention. If they were 10 or more words below the 50th percentile, they likely ended up in one of your groups. And that's the 50th percentile in the fall, but that's not the long-term goal. We want them to be where we need them to be in the spring, right? Each school year, your goal is to get them by the end of the school year to get them caught up. And that's possible for many of your students. If you have students who are just 1 or 2 years below grade level, you can make that much progress in a school year. If you have students who are 5 or 6 years below grade level, you maybe aren't going to be able to increase 6 grade levels in one school year. But that is still your long-term goal. That's still ultimately what you want, right? You're going to have many short-term goals before you get there, but it's important to keep in mind, where are the students' peers at? What pace are the peers able to read? What level, what content are the peers reading? And that is kind of what we want you to keep in mind. So let's take a look at some data from Lee. And we're going to take a look at his cold timing, hot timing, and see if there's progress. We're going to look at his students at a glance report. Before I do that, though, I'm just going to pop out of the PowerPoint for a moment, and I'm going to log in as a teacher, because I just want to make sure that you know how to run this report in case you're not familiar. So from the home page, you can locate the tile titled Reports. You can also access reports from the drop-down menu in the upper left corner. So when you select either the tile or the item in the drop-down menu, you're brought to a place where there's all of the reports are available. The first couple are administrative reports, your roster, your password, that sort of information. The third one over, the one in the upper right, is Read Naturally Live reports. And the very first one is Students at a Glance. Okay, so when I click on Students at a Glance, I can select one student, I could select 4 students, or I could hold the Shift key down while I select the bottom student, and it will highlight everybody. So that's sometimes a feature not everybody realizes. So if you select a student at the top of the list and you want to select all of them, before you select the student at the bottom of the list, push your Shift key down and hold it down while you select it, and that whole group will be selected. So whatever number you're going to run the report on, you click Generate Report for Selected. You select the date range by going into the actual calendar, but it defaults to the school year. So most likely you won't need to change that date. You can then just click Generate Reports, and the report will come up for your students. Okay. So that is how you generate this report. And this is the report that is the best for taking a look at whether or not you're seeing progress and deciding what it is you should change in order to increase their progress. So let's take a look at Lee. Again, as I mentioned before when we looked at his data, he's a 3rd grader. He's working in the Sequence Series 2.5. He's passed 12 stories. Lee's cold timing score started at averaging 41. He's at 48. He's making progress. His hot timing score averaged at 74. Now he's at 80. Progress there. So already he's met 2 or more of the criteria. He's making progress in cold timing, in hot timing. The difference between his current hot timing score and his goal is 10 words. His current hot timing score is the last number in the column. That's the most recent 3, the average from the most recent 3. So his average hot timing score right now is 80 and his goal is 70. That's a double-digit difference. So that indicates a challenge is needed. His quiz was strong to begin with. It's even better now, and his practices have gone down. Okay, so Lee absolutely is ready for more of a challenge. As I mentioned before, that's usually not the biggest question, or not the biggest, but it's usually not the hardest question to answer. A harder question to answer is, what is the right thing to do to Lee? It's more of a gray area. It's significantly more nuanced. So let's talk about how we make that decision. One thing we always take a look at is how many stories have they passed? Is there more content for them, or is my hand going to be forced because they've read all the passages in that story, in that level? I will tell you that most students do not need all 24 stories in the level. Most students are ready to move up before they get to that point. Okay. The other thing we're considering, as I mentioned before, is the student's long-term fluency benchmark goal, so unpracticed grade level material, 50th percentile. And then what we're going to do is ask ourselves a question on whether or not the student is closer to reading at the appropriate rate or the appropriate level. Which is he closer to? So it's kind of comparing apples to oranges a little bit, but you'll get the sense of how to do it. And what you're basically asking yourself is this student reading closer to the level, the grade level his peers are reading at, or is he reading closer to that pace that his peers are able to read at? All right. So we're going to ask ourselves these three questions with all of Lee's data present. So you can take a look at it and we'll walk through how to analyze this. So the first question is easy. How many stories has he passed? He's passed 12. A little more likely to increase the level. I've got plenty of stories left, so he can definitely stay in this level. I'm sorry, a little more likely to increase the goal. He's got plenty of stories left. Lee's long-term benchmark goal is the 50th percentile for third graders in the spring is 112 words on third grade level material. Okay, that's where we want him. Currently, Lee is reading 48 words correct per minute. We want him at 112. He has to more than double the pace that he's able to read a story in order to be reading it at the pace his peers are reading. He is a third grader in level 2.5. He's only half a level below. That's a nice luxury, right? That's not the case for all of our students, but it is for many of them. And the students who are reading close to grade level, you have a different issue often. This student is much closer to level. He's only half a grade level below, but he's more than doubling his pace in order to meet his goals. So the question is, what should we do? Think about what you might do. Would you want to give Lee harder material? Give him more challenging words? Give him harder content? Or are you not as worried about the difficulty in the content, but you are worried about his ability to read with accuracy and expression and at an appropriate pace? Because he has much further to go from a pace standpoint, you should hone in on pace. You should hone in on accuracy, on expression, on fluency. And so what I would recommend doing in this case is raising Lee's goal. I'm not that worried about a third grader in 2.5. The content isn't that different than what his peers are reading. But I am worried about the fact that his peers are able to read it in half the time. And so that is what I want to focus on if this were my student. When we raise a goal, we raise by 10 words. When we raise a level, we tend to raise by half a year. And we always discuss the change with the student. And I just want to spend a moment talking about why. The first reason is real obvious, and that's just because it's a nice conversation, right? In education, we have to talk about things that students don't want to talk about all the time. We have to have these conversations that nobody's interested in having more often than we like. So when you are given the opportunity to have a conversation with your student where the student wants to have it and you want to have it, that enjoy that, right? It's a nice thing to get to tell a struggling reader that you think he's ready for more of a challenge. But the other reason is maybe not quite as obvious, and that is that the student needs to understand on a level, on an experience level. They need to experience the fact that they are in charge of their progress. You are not in charge of their progress. At the end of the day, they are the ones that have to do the reading, right? You can't make a student a better reader without him. You can't make him a better reader. You can find a good program. You can spend hours creating an incentive program to get him motivated. You can have the perfect room set up in a perfect way. You can have $100 on candy bars. And that still isn't going to make him a better reader unless he reads. He's the one that has to read. You can't do it for him. And so the student needs to understand in an experienced way that they get to decide how much progress they make. And so saying to the student, I think you're ready for more of a challenge. What do you think? And getting them to become a participant in that decision-making process helps them understand on a personal and experience level that they are in charge of their progress. So in Lee's case, his previous goal was 70, his new goal would be 80. You can make that change in Read Live in a couple of ways. In Lee's case, with our Data Mentor feature that I mentioned at the beginning of this session, Data Mentor is a feature that looks at the student's data and provides you with suggestions on whether or not a change is needed. I want you to take a look at this page. It might look familiar to you. This is the Pass Review Work page. So look at the taskbar along the top of the screenshot up here. You can see all the steps the students go through when they work and read Naturally Live. So this student has done the keywords, prediction, and so forth. He's done the pass with me. I've already listened to him read the story. Okay, right? So you're sitting with the student, you listen to him on that final pass timing, you correct his open-ended question, and then you land on a story details page. That story details is the first tab in this series of tabs across the top. Notice that in this case, there's a red dot on the final tab that's titled Data Mentor. Whenever there's a red dot, it means that there is a suggestion in here. It means that the computer thinks that the student's data indicates he needs more of a challenge. And it's telling you that you should consider raising the goal from 70 to 80. Okay? It's a suggestion. It doesn't know everything you know about your kids. So you might not agree with it, and that's okay. If you ignore it, it will just update when new data comes in. So you're never going to have like a list of a dozen different suggestions. You will always have if there's a suggestion in there, it will always be based on the most current data. And if the data indicates that no change is needed, it will just say no change is needed at this time. Okay. But if you agree with this, you click that accept button. And Lee will automatically be moved from his 12 stories he's passed to the new set, and his goal will automatically be changed just by clicking that accept button. So notice that now his story goal is 80 instead of 70. So you can manually change their levels and story goals whenever you think it's right in a couple places. But Data Mentor allows you to just click the button accept, and that will make the change for you. Okay, I'm just going to pop out of the PowerPoint one last time to show you a couple places where you can make that change manually. So if you want to make a change to a student and the Data Mentor isn't suggesting it, but you think a change is needed, under the student activity tile in the staff module, you can see that you have a list of all of your students. If you click the drop-down menu next to the student's name, and you locate the Read Naturally Live application in their list of applications. If you go all the way to the right past the assignment column, there's a button, that has a picture of a piece of paper and a pencil. And when you hover over that, it says change assignment. So if I want to manually adjust a level or goal, I can click that change assignment button and come in here and raise or lower the level or goal. When I click save and close, then that change will be made. If the student is working in the program, you can click on this teacher button. You know, this teacher button that's on every student screen. You can log in through the student screen by using that teacher button, and you can make the change from there too. So you can make it from the staff module manually, you can make it from the student module manually, and by clicking accept, the computer will automatically make the change if that's the suggestion. All right, so Lee made a lot of progress. All right, let's fast forward to the end of the year. We're almost there. I'm in Minnesota, so we're less there than others probably, but we're getting close. It's March. So let's say it's a little further ahead. We're in May, and we get our fall or our spring assessment. When you're deciding if a student is ready to exit an intervention, you use formal assessment data, just like you do when you decide if a student is ready to enter or needs to enter. So in the fall, Lee read 36 words correct per minute. That put him down probably maybe a little below the 10th percentile. And so that's why he was in your intervention group. Now let's say it's May of this school year, and now he's on the formal assessment, he read 85 words correct per minute. He's made a lot of progress. He is no longer in the 10th percentile. He is climbing up. Okay. Is he climbed up enough to get out? This data is the best data. Call it the gold standard of data, if you will. But the downfall of it is that it only happens 3 times a year. Your curriculum-based measurement data, your CBM data, curriculum-based measurement data is collected every day as your student works and read Naturally Live. And if your student is reading at or very close to grade level, these scores are very valuable. Lee's a third grader in 3.5. His cold timing score of 80 is a good number because he's reading at grade level. So I can take a look at that. If I want to peek between assessments, if in March I want to peek and see if they're getting close to exit, and I know that the assessment's not going to come till May, I can take a look at their curriculum-based measurement data just to get a sense of where they're at. We want Lee to read 112 words correct per minute on third grade level material for the first time. Is he ready to be done? He's not. His spring assessment says he's read 85. His curriculum-based measurement shows us at 80. We highlight this number to let you know, and just to be sure that you know, as you likely do, we never use hot timings when we compare them to norms. There are no hot timing averages. The hot timing number is really somewhat irrelevant to us. The kids love it and we should celebrate it because it's important to them. But what we care about are those cold timings, the first time they read a passage. And we don't want to take a look at where we wanted him in the fall, right? This 83 number is no longer relevant to us. We want him where we needed him to be in the spring. So Lee has made progress. He's made a lot of progress, but he is not ready to exit. Okay, so Lee was a student who made a lot of progress and was real easy to decide that we wanted to raise his goal and make a change for him. But what happens if you have a student who isn't? So I'm going to talk about some different things that I talk with teachers about when we look at data reports and there's student performance issues. I want you to always ask yourself whether or not your students are completing the steps properly. Do they do the steps with fidelity when they're in your classroom? The step that is most commonly done poorly is the read along step. It's not listen along. It's not gaze up at the stars. It is read along actively with your mouths, whisper reading. Fluency work is always done orally, all of it. From the cold timing to the read along to the practice to the pass, they are always reading out loud. They don't have to be screaming. Please don't. I tell them to whisper read. I want to hear them whispering, reading if I'm standing right next to them. They have to do that. They have to see the words, hear the words, say the words in order for them to learn new words and to solidify high frequency words. It's absolutely imperative. Okay. So make sure your students are performing the read along step properly. Make sure they're performing the practice step properly. If there's a word they're a little unsure of, have them click on it. Many students don't like to admit they don't know something, and so they don't click on words they don't know during the practice. Tell them that you expect them to have words they don't know. Let them off the hook. Let them know that they're in a level that's likely to be hard. And so you expect there to be a few words they have to click on every time. Because that clicking and hearing and seeing and saying, all of those things help those students add those words to their word bank. Okay, so making sure their steps are done correctly is the very first thing you always look at if there's performance issues. The next thing to consider is a program adjustment. And what I mean by that is a change to the steps. We call them story options. So if you want to adjust a student's story options, if you want to change the steps, it can make a huge difference for students. For example, if I have an 8th grader reading at a 3rd grade level, I'm probably not going to have them spend time typing a retell. I don't think they have the luxury to work on writing. I want them to have 5 more minutes reading. So I turn the retell off. If I have a young student, I might turn the prediction off too, because typing makes them frustrated and I can't get them frustrated before they even start reading. So making that adjustment sometimes helps. Other adjustments that go a long way are whole story timings. So when students practice reading the story during the practice step, they practice for 1 minute at a time. That's the default setting. But the setting or the story option that you can change is you can make it so that the student practices reading the whole story. So instead of just reading for 1 minute, they read all the words in the story. When they finish the story, they click the finish button. And the computer calculates it words correct per minute. So the computer does the math for the student. And the number in the box that tells you their score is going to be a permanent score. Okay, but working on reading endurance and reading the entire story is very a helpful thing, especially for older students who are higher levels with longer passages. Okay. Um, Other adjustments that can be made is having students read along fewer times. Middle school and high school students don't usually need all three read alongs. You want them to read along properly, so tell them that you'll drop them down to two, maybe even one if they're doing really well, if they do the read along properly. All right, so all of those adjustments can make a big difference. The next thing to think about is classroom management. And I think about that in two separate ways. The first one is the way that I don't like. It's the thing I like least about teaching. It's the thing I like least about parenting. And that is that when you are a teacher, you have to be good at getting kids to do things they don't want to do. It's part of the job. Um, you have to get kids to complete the steps with fidelity, right? You have to get them to stay on task. These are things that teachers need to be good at in order to be effective teachers. And so one of the things to think about is, are you making sure that your students are staying on task? Are you enforcing proper implementation of the rules? Sometimes a student has to be sent back to the read along step because they didn't do it the right way. And that is a really important thing to think about. The other way to think, I think about classroom management is more like an incentive program. So instead of having a consequence, there's rewards for staying on task. There's rewards for getting 100% correct on the quiz the first time through. The easiest thing to keep track of, and actually in many ways the most valuable data point, is keeping track of the number of stories your students pass each week. Okay. Students should, if you're doing this program 3 to 5 days a week, they should pass 2 or 3 stories a week. So if you do it 3 to 5 days a week for 30 to 45 minutes. So let's say on the low end, if you do this program 3 days a week and you're in there for 30 minutes each day, your students should pass about 2 stories. If you do it 5 days a week and they're in there for 30 to 40 minutes, then they should get through at least 3 stories. Your student who passes the most stories at the end of the school year, whichever student passed the most stories, is going to be the student that made the most progress almost every time. Okay. They might not be in the highest level, right? Because they might have started at the lowest level of your group, but they made the most progress because they stayed on task. They wasted the least amount of time. On our website, we have a resource that's called the weekly story tracker, and you can either print it out or type into it and have it be an electronic document, a list of your students' names, then across the top of the table are the days of the week. And when a student passes a story, they just make a check mark in the day of the week that they passed, and you can keep track of how many stories each student passed each week. We also have Avery labels, those you can print off Avery labels. There's uh, a document that contains all of the story titles in every level in our program. So if you wanted to go to our website and print off Avery labels, when a student is working in 3.5, he gets the sheet of Avery labels with all the 3.5 passages. And when he passes the Old Faithful story, he can peel off the Old Faithful Avery sticker label and stick it on a bulletin board that's on your wall. It will take you 5 minutes to get it set up for your students. And it goes a long way. So in order to do that, or when you do that, I encourage you to also keep track of how many stories the whole group passed. Because if their peers want them to stay on task also, that is a very powerful tool, is getting their peers to try to keep them on task during the time as well. So having them focus on how many stories they are able to pass will go a long way. Another thing to consider is supplementary instruction. If you have a student who makes a lot of errors, too many errors to pass, sometimes it's because he's a speed demon, in which case we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you suspect there could be a phonics issue, you might need to put the student in word warm-ups. Word warm-ups is the phonics intervention that's in Read Live. If you have a subscription to Read Live, you have access to word warm-ups live. And that provides phonics support for one syllable, two syllable, and multisyllabic words, your 3, 4 syllable words that are really hard. So sometimes working on some of those phonics issues can help. We also have a comprehension resource in your program. It's called the Comprehension Builder and a Comprehension Tips document. So there's actually 2 documents within your account that you can print off. The Comprehension Builder gives you lesson plan and activity ideas for teaching comprehension. And the comprehension tips give you just little suggestions on how to improve comprehension as students work through the program. So consider those things. And then finally, adjusting a level and goal. Students need to know they're going somewhere. And sometimes that is all they need to know in order for them to be re-engaged. I often think about it as I'm a runner. So when I run on a treadmill, I'm still running, but it's nowhere near as fun as when you're running outside on the roads, right? A hamster in a wheel is a lot harder to keep yourself going at a fast pace than it is out in the wild. And that is because we need to know we're going somewhere. And so if your students have a level or a goal increase, that can make them feel like, okay, I'm making progress. It's going to re-engage them. So our last activity today is to take a look at 3 students, the data from Jeff, John, and Janelle, and ask ourselves whether or not they need a change in what it should be. What I'm going to do in this case is there's 2 things to take a look at. One is that there's going to be a little information on each student that's provided to you that isn't in the report, but it's information that if you were this student's teacher, you would know about that student. So we're going to consider that. And the other thing I'm going to do with a couple of the students is change something about the student and see if we would make a different decision. Okay, so let's take a look at these 3 students. We're going to start with, I think we start with John. But in your handout for this presentation, there is a takeaway document that will also help you with this activity. So this is a resource that you can utilize when you're looking at your own students' data. But as we go through this data on Jeff, John, and Janelle, this resource might help you as well because it provides you with the 50th percentile for oral norms. It provides you with the placement ranges, the levels that we have, the difference between the goal and the hot timing, those kinds of things. So if you want to look at this document when answering these questions, you can certainly do that, and you can utilize it when you're looking at your own reports. So one thing to note about Jeff is that he does his own cold timings. If a student does their own cold timings, it means that there is not going to be a suggestion on Data Mentor. So if you allow students to do their own cold timings, Data Mentor is never going to provide you with a suggestion because it doesn't know if the data is accurate. So you need to really rely on this students at a glance report. Okay, Jeff's got a great attitude. He works really hard. He's a 3rd grader who's passed 12 stories. His current cold timing is 61 and it has not made progress. His hot timing has gone up a little bit. The difference between his hot timing and goal is 7, so it's not a double-digit difference. His quiz started in the 60 percentile range and now we're in the 80 percentile range. So that's awesome. So we have progress in hot timing, progress in quiz, and his past practices have been cut in half. So he used to have to practice 6 times to meet that hot timing of 93. The average practices for the hot timing of 93 was 6. Now his hot timing average is 97. He's only practicing 3 times to get there. Okay, so he absolutely needs more of a challenge. What should we do? Well, he's passed 12 stories. That indicates I'm a little more likely to raise his goal. His long-term goal is 112. He's at 61. So he has to double his long-term goal. He's a 3rd grader in 3.0. So he's much closer at level. Okay, so Jeff is a little bit like Lee. He's pretty close at grade level. I'm not that worried about the level that he's working in, but I am worried about his pace. So I'm going to raise his goal. I'm going to let him become more automatic with the words at that level before I put him in a harder level. So Jeff's new goal would be 100. Okay, we could make that change manually, which we would have to do. Because Jeff self-times, the computer does not provide suggestions for a student who doesn't have the teacher present for the cold timing. You also have to have the quiz turned on in order to get Data Mentor to work for you. Now, what if Jeff was an 8th grader? All the data is the same, so he still needs a change. He still passed 12 stories. Now his the number we want him at the end of the year is 146. So he has to go up even higher. But he's an eighth grader in 3.0. I don't know which one is further away. They're both a lot of a gap, right? There's a huge gap in both of them. He's 5 years below grade level. Would you raise his goal or would you get him into more difficult content? With older kids and kids who are many, many years below grade level, you are going to be more aggressive with their level raise because you don't have an option. You got to get him in harder material. He's got to see more challenging words and more difficult content. And so if Jeff was my student as an eighth grader, I would put him in the higher level of 3.5. Okay, let's take a look at John. John is a student that makes too many errors to pass on his first attempt. Okay, so when you have a student like that, you can take a look at this data, but can you make a change? Can you give a student more of a challenge if he's not able to be accurate on his past timing? I don't think so. So in this case, John's made a tiny bit of progress in cold timing and hot timing. Statistically, like a 1% increase. So it's not much. We're not real pleased with it. The difference between goal and hot timing is a single digit. His quiz has gone up a little bit and his practices have remained the same. He's not ready for more of a challenge. Okay, even if he had made a little progress, in a little more progress in some areas, I still wouldn't give him more of a challenge if he's making too many errors to pass on the first attempt. I would provide him with guidance. I would tell him, if you don't start being more accurate, I'm going to have to lower your level or lower your goal. I might assess him for phonics if that's what I suspect is the issue. But if he's one of those kids that starts to read really fast when the timing starts, you need to stop the timing and say, we don't read that way. We read with expression. We read with accuracy. We read at the pace in which we speak. So that is something, whenever you time kids, teachers are always pushing against that racing because you're timing them. So of course they feel like it's a race. So we're always working against that. But if your student's making too many mistakes, you need to provide the students with guidance. It would say there's not any suggestion because the student hasn't made enough progress. And when they do their first pass attempt, they're getting too many errors to pass. Okay. If Jeff was having too many errors to pass on his first attempt and his quiz was down in the 60 percentile range or below, then you're going to need to lower the level. And nobody wants a lower level. Your kid doesn't want it. You don't want it. The parent doesn't want it. It's no good for anybody. But here's what I will tell you. It does help. Because here's what happens. Your student doesn't make many errors on the past timing, so he passes on his first attempt of the past timing. He's able to be more accurate. The other thing is he gets more of his quiz questions correct, which feels good. I don't know if you know this, but when your student answers a quiz question, when they click next, it tells them whether they got it right or wrong. It goes da 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 da, right? It's this happy sound. And if they get it wrong, it goes doo doo. It's a sad sound. So if you're constantly getting questions wrong and you're constantly getting that sound that's negative, and then you go to pass for your teacher and you don't because you had 7 errors, that feels not good. But if you get him in a lower level, he'll do better on the quiz, he'll do better with accuracy, and he'll start to like the program more because he'll be more successful there. When you put him back into 5.0, once he's ready to move back up, the stories he passed are still going to be passed. He's not going to have to redo anything. All of that data is still in there. He'll just pick up where he left off. All right. Now we're going to end on a positive note with Janelle. She's the student that makes tons of progress. She's made huge gains in cold timing, huge gains in past timing, big difference between her hot timing and goal. In fact, we've already raised the goal once, even though she's only passed 12 stories. She's getting 100% on average on the quiz. So for at least the last 3 stories, she's gotten 100% on her quiz. That tells you something about content. It tells you something about the student's confidence too. So every area she's making more progress. We know she needs more of a challenge. Okay. She's only passed 12. She's actually closer to reading at level because she has to more than double her pace and she's only a year and a half below grade level. So she is closer to level. But in this case, I would be more likely to raise Janelle's level because she's getting 100% right on the quiz. That tells me something about content. Also, she's making huge gains, so I know her confidence is up. And when you have a student with high confidence, they can handle more of a challenge. And it's a bigger challenge to raise the level. It is harder for a student to go to the next level than it is for them to get a higher goal. So that is a bigger, a more aggressive change. And in a case like this, where you see a student soaring, make that more aggressive change. Student growth in reading is often like child physical growth, right? They grow in spurts sometimes. You know, if you're a parent, you know what it's like when every month you have to buy a new set of shoes, new school shoes, new basketball shoes, every different area because they're growing so fast. And then comes a time where they don't need new shoes. In fact, they need new shoes because they wore them out rather than they grew out of them. And so they plateaued. And that kind of happens with reading growth with many of our students too. So if a student is on a soar, if they're on a fast increase of growth, take advantage of that and be more aggressive with your challenges. Okay, so in Janelle's case, we would make that change to 3.0. Data Mentor would provide that suggestion to you, and you could click that accept button, and the change would be made. All right. So that is all of our information on keeping students challenged. Our help page on our website has great resources, as does our training page. I really appreciate you being here for your struggling readers. It says a lot about you. And I'm a mother of 5, so I appreciate all you do for all of your students. There is a quick survey at the end. Please do complete that. Feel free to add questions in there if you have them, and have a wonderful day.